The men who try the hardest are often the ones ignored. The ones who don't even try? They're the ones everyone watches. It doesn't make sense at first. We're told that effort is everything, that confidence, charisma, and success are built on performance. Smile wider, speak louder, be more. But behind closed doors, in the unspoken language of human behavior, something strange keeps happening. There are men who don't chase attention, yet somehow attention finds them. They aren't loud. They don't perform. They don't flatter or compete. And still, they become the gravitational center of the room. Women notice them. Men react to them. Even silence bends toward them. What's happening here isn't seduction. It's not a charm. It's something far deeper, something that modern society doesn't quite know how to talk about. It's presence, power, perception. We've built a culture obsessed with surface, curated photos, carefully sculpted identities, algorithmic attraction. But none of it can explain the silent force behind the kind of person who attracts without trying. This is a force that lives beneath the eyes, in the psychology of how we assign meaning, in the philosophy of being, and in the invisible patterns of dominance and submission that govern social life. Effortless attraction isn't magic. It isn't luck. It's a signal. And like all signals, it travels beneath language. It bypasses performance. It doesn't ask for permission, but this kind of attraction is double-edged. Because while some are drawn to it, others are threatened by it. In a world that rewards conformity, the man who radiates silent presence without asking for approval becomes unpredictable. And what is unpredictable ... is dangerous. In this video, we're going to unpack the psychology and philosophy behind this paradox. Why do some people command attention simply by existing? What makes a man deeply magnetic without saying a word? We'll look at ancient ideas and modern systems. We'll explore the mechanics of attention, desire, and subconscious communication. And we'll reveal how attraction, real attraction, often starts not with what you do, but with what you stop doing, because attraction isn't a transaction. It's not about gaining value. It's about revealing truth, and in the 5 signs ahead, you'll see why the most magnetic people are often the ones who don't even realize it. This is not a guide on how to be liked. It's not a trick to win affection. It's a confrontation with something more uncomfortable, the possibility that what draws others to us might be what we're taught to suppress. So if you've ever felt like the rules of attraction don't quite add up, if you've ever wondered why trying harder sometimes makes things worse, this is for you. Not to teach you how to act, but to show you what might already be there, beneath the surface, unseen and powerful. In every social space, there are 2 types of energy. The kind that reaches outward and the kind that pulls inward. The one who reaches is loud, expressive, constantly trying to insert himself into the moment. He smiles wider, laughs harder, stands taller. He's chasing the experience, performing for approval, seeking recognition. But then there's the other kind, quieter, still, watching, not performing, not resisting, just being. He doesn't try to join the conversation, yet somehow the conversation slowly bends toward him. People can't always explain why, but they feel it. His presence has weight. His silence isn't empty, it's full. This is the paradox of observation, of non-chasing, of stillness mistaken for mystery. Because in human psychology, attention is a form of currency. And like all currency, the less you give it away, the more valuable it seems. When someone withholds attention or simply doesn't offer it indiscriminately, others become curious. Even unsettled. It's not arrogance. It's not manipulation. It's detachment. And that detachment creates power. When a man doesn't chase, not love, not approval, not opportunity. He signals that he has something more important than validation. He has internal anchoring, a quiet sense of sufficiency. Simone de Beauvoir once said, "It is the gaze that gives meaning." We assume that to be noticed is to have power. But what happens when someone refuses to look, or more accurately, when they look without reaching? Their gaze becomes selective, and selective attention always becomes valuable. In relationships, this triggers a deep psychological loop. Scarcity heightens value. In behavioral economics, this is known as reactance, the tendency for people to want what is restricted or withheld. And when a man doesn't immediately chase, doesn't flood the room with his need to be seen, he becomes the source of scarcity. It's not about playing games. It's about being rooted enough to witness reality rather than manipulate it. Most people are desperate to shape the moment. They scan faces for reactions, adjust their tone to please, shrink their honesty to survive. But the person who simply observes doesn't enter the game. And that refusal creates gravity. We see this in cinema, in literature, in the real world. Think of Tyler Durden in Fight Club. His appeal isn't in what he does, but in what he doesn't do. He doesn't need permission. He doesn't chase validation. He watches, and the world watches him back. Think of Meursault, the anti-hero. In Camus, the stranger. Emotionally detached, disinterested in convention, yet hauntingly magnetic. His refusal to respond to life in expected ways creates existential tension. You can't relate to him, but you can't forget him either. Or Raskolnikov in Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. Alienated, observant, intellectually cold, but undeniably compelling. His distance creates a kind of myth. These characters aren't likable in the traditional sense, but they hold the room. They draw the eye. Why? Because they don't reach for us. And in a world where everyone is reaching, that refusal becomes powerful. Now imagine that same energy in real life. A man sitting quietly in a cafe. He's not scrolling. He's not fidgeting. He's simply present, watching the world, unhurried. He's not waiting for something. He's witnessing it. Most people are uncomfortable with this kind of stillness because it holds a mirror to our own agitation. That's the true source of his magnetic energy. He's not performing life. He's living it from the inside out. It triggers curiosity. Who is he? What is he thinking? Why is he not trying to be liked? But here's the twist. He's not disinterested. He's deeply aware of the noise, the performance, the scripts everyone else is playing out unconsciously, and that awareness, when it's unspoken, unadvertised, becomes an invisible flame. Women especially, who are socialized to read subtext, detect this immediately. They sense the quiet resistance in him, the unspoken question, why isn't he trying to impress me? And in that moment, attraction begins. Not because he's playing hard to get, but because he's not playing at all. The observer attracts because he doesn't need to attract. Witness commands attention because he isn't asking for it. And what seems like distance is often just depth. Depth that doesn't need an audience. Depth that doesn't chase, it draws. Because in the quietest spaces of human connection, we don't fall for the one making noise. We fall for the one who makes us feel seen, not by what they say, but by how they see. True attraction doesn't live in the things we say. It lives in the spaces we're afraid to leave empty. Most people fear silence. In conversation, silence feels like failure, like awkwardness, rejection, or loss of control, so they rush to fill it with jokes, with noise, with stories that don't matter. But some people don't. Some people are comfortable with the pause, with the stillness, with the subtle tension that silence brings. They don't rush to resolve it. They hold it. And that changes everything. Because what most overlook is this: conversation is not just about information. It's about energy. And in that energy, tension is everything. The most magnetic people, the ones others lean toward, are those who know how to carry that tension. Not aggressively, not manipulatively, but quietly. They speak slowly, deliberately. They don't overshare. They don't interrupt the rhythm of the moment to insert their opinions. And because they don't scramble to control the emotional space, they become the emotional center of it. This is not about aloofness. It's about gravity. They reveal just enough to keep your attention, but never enough to collapse the mystery. Desire, as the psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan observed, is born not from satisfaction, but from lack. We don't desire what we fully understand. We desire what remains partially out of reach, what keeps us guessing. And so, the person who doesn't explain everything, who leaves gaps, unanswered glances, unfinished thoughts, becomes irresistible. In modern psychology, this is known as controlled vulnerability. You're open, but only slightly. You offer glimpses, not confessions. This isn't hiding. It's a calibrated revelation. In a world that rewards immediate transparency, where emotions are tweeted, streamed, and dissected in real time, restraint becomes radical. And radicals become rare. Rare things, by nature, are chased. This is why truly magnetic individuals don't compete with noise. They introduce quiet and let others come closer to hear it. Nowhere is this dynamic more psychologically potent than in attraction, especially when seen through the lens of depth psychology, particularly Carl Jung's exploration of archetypes. Jung described the anima and animus, the unconscious feminine and masculine aspects within each individual. The attraction we feel toward others is often a projection of these inner archetypes. So when a woman is drawn toward a man who holds emotional tension, who doesn't collapse into neediness or disintegrate under pressure, she may not just be responding to him. She may be responding to the part of herself that longs to be held by something stable, something strong, something that can contain what is chaotic without trying to fix it. This isn't about dominance. It's about containment. The ability to sit with discomfort, with mystery, with emotion, without trying to make it go away. And because most men have been taught to fear emotional ambiguity, to resolve it or run from it, the man who doesn't flinch, who can sit in the space between certainty and confusion, becomes rare. And therefore, he becomes magnetic. Think of the mythic archetype of the storm watcher. He doesn't run from the sky when it darkens. He stands at the edge of the field and watches it form. And those around him feel something ancient in his stillness. In emotional terms, that's what this kind of presence feels like. It doesn't demand. It doesn't retreat. It contains. And women, especially those attuned to emotional nuance, can sense it immediately. They may not articulate it, but they feel it, not in the words, but in the spaces between them. Not in the stories, but in the silence that follows them. In these silent moments, something deeper unfolds. Curiosity grows, connection forms. Not through explanation, but through atmosphere. Through a kind of suspended meaning. Modern culture, however, doesn't like suspended meaning. It likes resolution. Tell me your opinion. Make your argument. Share your trauma. Entertain me. Overshare. Explain. Perform. But in this hyperverbal world, the man who doesn't rush to fill space becomes disorienting. And in that disorientation, fascination takes root, because holding tension is a kind of power. It's not about withholding affection. It's about refusing to collapse into superficial comfort. That's what makes it seductive. Not in the romantic sense, but in the psychological sense. It invites others to enter a space that isn't immediately safe or defined. And in doing so, it calls forth something deeper, a desire to explore, to understand, to uncover dot. So while the world teaches us to speak more, share more, push more, the truly magnetic person does something else entirely. They wait. They hold. They allow the moment to stretch, because they understand what most people don't. In the right kind of silence, the soul leans forward dot, and in that lean, attraction begins. There is a rare kind of presence that doesn't need to be explained. It doesn't shout. It doesn't convince me. It doesn't even care to be understood dot. It simply is dot. And when someone lives from that place, when their actions, values, words, and energy form a single line, they become quietly unshakable. This is the power of self-alignment dot in a world where everyone is constantly adjusting, editing, and apologizing for who they are. The person who moves without apology radiates something primal, something unforgettable. They don't dominate the room by force. They dominate by integrity, not the moral kind, but the structural kind. Their personality holds. It doesn't collapse when tested. It doesn't shift to match the crowd dot, and when others encounter that kind of congruence, they feel it. Because most of us are trained to adapt, to become palatable, to modify our identity depending on who's watching. But alignment? That's rebellion. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche called this process becoming who you are. Not inventing yourself, but peeling away everything you were told to be, until only the real remains dot. It's a slow-burning power, one that emerges not from performance, but from patience, from refusing to betray yourself even when it would be easier to, and that refusal creates heat. Jean-Paul Sartre offered a similar idea in different language. He wrote that existence precedes essence, meaning you are not born with a fixed identity. You choose it, you craft it, you shape your own meaning. But here's the catch. To do that, you must accept full responsibility for who you are. And most people can't handle that weight dot, so they borrow meanings. They adopt personalities from social media. They speak in borrowed quotes. They wear borrowed confidence, but borrowed identity always crumbles under pressure. It doesn't last. Real alignment, on the other hand, comes from living inward first. And when someone lives inward first, they move differently. They don't overexploit their strengths. They don't hide their flaws. They carry both in balance. And that balance creates an unusual effect. Other people stop trying to test them because they sense there's no performance to interrupt. It's not about being perfect. It's about being whole. This kind of wholeness makes a person extremely attractive, not in the superficial sense, but in the energetic one, because in a fragmented culture where people are constantly shifting masks, coherence becomes magnetic. The man who doesn't have to prove he's smart, or funny, or masculine, is often more compelling than the one who can't stop trying. He doesn't argue to win. He doesn't seek attention to feel real. He doesn't perform his emotions for applause. He just is. And the world adjusts. There's a certain kind of woman, usually intuitive, intelligent, and emotionally mature, who finds this almost impossible to ignore, not because it flatters her, but because it grounds her. It allows her to drop her own performance in his presence. She can feel her own inner compass again, because aligned people have a strange effect. They make others remember who they were before they started pretending. This is why alignment can be unsettling. It's a mirror. It exposes the incoherence in others, not by accusation, but by contrast. In this way, alignment becomes a form of quiet dominance, not imposed from the outside, but radiating from the center. Now, compare this with the world we live in today. We are living in what could be called a personal economy, an entire system built around packaging identity for consumption. Influence is manufactured. Confidence is rehearsed. Personality is sliced into digestible content. Every tweet is a performance. Every smile is a strategy. Every vulnerability is A product. And so realness, unbranded, unfiltered, unoptimized, becomes radical. And radicals become rare, and rare, as we've seen, becomes irresistible. So when someone speaks plainly, without agenda, when they live from their inner world instead of outer validation, they disrupt the system, because the system isn't built for that. It's built for adaptation, not authenticity, but authenticity doesn't chase applause. It doesn't beg to be like. It just stands there, quietly, fully, unapologetically, and waits for the world to catch up. That's why people are drawn to those who are aligned. They don't just want to be around them. They want to be them, because alignment whispers something we all long to hear. You don't need to become someone else to be enough. You just need to stop apologizing for who you already are. Some people walk into a room and adapt to it. They scan the mood, mimic the tone, blend into the rhythm, but others do something entirely different. They bring a different rhythm. They don't try to fit the world. They build one. And soon enough, people start to orbit it. This is the fourth sign of deep, unconscious attraction. You create a world, and others want to live in it. It's not about control. It's about presence. It's not about dominance. It's about the atmosphere. You can feel it in certain people. A strange sense that they're plugged into a frequency no one else is hearing. Not distracted, not hurried, just clear. Fully inside their own experience, they speak in a slower rhythm. Their attention moves with purpose. They don't chase relevance. They carry meaning. And when you're near someone like that, you don't just hear their words. You feel their world. This world could be philosophical. It could be artistic. It could be emotional or intellectual. But whatever it is, it's theirs. Crafted from the inside out, not borrowed from trend or tribe. And that inner world becomes a kind of gravity. People want to be close to it. Not because it's loud, but because it feels like a portal. Like something real in a world made of replicas. Michel Foucault, the philosopher of systems and hidden power structures, once said that power isn't always a weapon. Sometimes it's a field. An energy that silently organizes the space around it. That's exactly what happens here. You become a field, a mood, a myth. And in a time where identity is consumed like fast food, the person who carries a distinct inner landscape becomes almost mythological. Think of someone like Frida Kahlo. Her art wasn't just visual. It was an entry point into her inner cosmology. Her style, her silence, her gaze, it all carried the density of someone who had crafted a world from pain, imagination, and rebellion. Or James Baldwin. When he spoke, people didn't just listen, they entered a terrain, a geography of thought. He made language itself feel like a home you could walk through. These weren't performers. They were world builders. And world builders are unforgettable. In Jungian psychology, this is the archetype of the magician, the one who doesn't follow the map but draws it, the one who holds symbolic keys to unseen dimensions. And that archetype doesn't seduce in the usual sense. It enchants, because the truth is, most people are bored, not just with others, but with themselves. They've been conditioned to exist in loops, routine conversations, recycled identities, predictable emotions. So when they encounter someone who seems to live in a different story, one richer, darker, more imaginative, it awakens something. And that awakening is magnetic. Especially for women who live attuned to the symbolic, who feel before they explain, who long for meaning beyond performance. For them, the man who has built a world, even if they can't fully access it, becomes a symbol of possibility, of depth, of risk, not because he is showing off, but because he is elsewhere anchored, in something bigger than the social game. And that elsewhere becomes a siren call. You'll often hear women Describe men like this in poetic language. He has this energy I can't define. He's in his own space. He's just different. What they're sensing is not charisma in the traditional sense. It's narrative gravity. This man is not a prop in someone else's script. He is the author of his own. And even if his world is unfinished, chaotic, or strange, it's alive. And aliveness is more attractive than perfection ever will be. But here's what makes it even more compelling. He's not trying to bring anyone into his world. He just lives there, fully, authentically, without invitation or apology. And in that unapologetic immersion, others begin to drift closer, to ask questions, to want in, because in a culture that teaches people to be brands, the man who becomes a story becomes a legend. So if you've ever wondered why some people linger in memory long after they leave the room, why their energy echoes without explanation, this is why. They don't sell a version of themselves. They don't adapt to expectations. They create a private mythology and let others come find it, not out of arrogance, but out of integrity, and in doing so, they remind others of something they forgot, that life is not just something to react to, it's something to build. And some people, without even trying, become architects of wonder, because they stopped looking for a home in others and started building one within. Some people draw others in because they're exciting, others because they're comforting. But then there's a different kind of presence, one that unsettles, not through confrontation, not through volume, but simply by existing. This is the final and often most misunderstood sign of unconscious attraction. You threaten systems without saying a word. You don't have to argue. You don't have to resist. You don't even have to speak. Your silence, your stillness already says enough. Because some people, by simply standing where they are, expose the cracks in everything around them. In psychology, there's a term called disturbing the equilibrium. It refers to the way certain presences disrupt the social or emotional status quo. Most groups, relationships, and environments operate on unspoken rules, hierarchies of attention, masks of politeness, rituals of ego. But some people carry a presence that throws those rituals into question. They're not trying to rebel, they simply don't participate. And that non-participation? It reveals the performance of everyone else. This is why deeply self-possessed individuals, especially men who don't perform masculinity in the expected ways, can become lightning rods. In a world that demands conformity through social signals, the one who doesn't signal anything becomes unreadable. And the unreadable is always threatening. Because if you can't be predicted, you can't be controlled. And if you can't be controlled, you must be watched, studied, feared. You'll find this idea echoed in Foucault's writings on surveillance and power. For Foucault, control isn't just about force, it's about visibility. Power needs to know where you are, what you think, how you'll respond. But when someone operates outside the expected narrative, they slip out of reach. Their unpredictability becomes a form of resistance. This is why some of the most magnetic people, especially those who attract without trying, are also the ones who make others uneasy. Not because they're dangerous, but because they could be, because they represent a variable the system didn't account for. And in terms of gender dynamics, this creates a strange tension. On one hand, women are drawn to this energy. It feels strong, autonomous, unshaped by social desperation. But on the other hand, it can be confronting, because it forces others to ask, if he doesn't need my approval, then what does he want? And beneath that question is another, why do I want his? That's the hidden edge of attraction. It isn't just about desire, it's about power. Emotional, psychological, energetic. And when one person stops needing the system, whether it's a social hierarchy, a romantic expectation, or a cultural norm, they become sovereign. And sovereignty is magnetic. In ancient cultures, the sovereign man wasn't necessarily the king. He was the one who could walk away from the kingdom, the one who wasn't bound by the laws of men because he answered to something deeper, his own internal order. That's what people feel when they meet someone like this today. A quiet refusal to play the game. A steady center that doesn't bend under pressure. A presence that doesn't seek validation and doesn't offer apology. In Jungian terms, this is the integration of the shadow. The person who has faced their darkness, who has made peace with their contradictions, no longer leaks insecurity. They don't overcorrect. They don't impress. And because of that, their very existence challenges others to confront what they've avoided in themselves. This is why truly self-aligned people often become scapegoats, myths, or icons, because society doesn't know what to do with someone who refuses to betray themselves. So it reacts, projects, fantasizes, fears. But this reaction is also the deepest sign of attraction, because it reveals that something real is happening, something that pierces through performance and touches the raw edge of identity. To threaten a system without saying a word means you have escaped its gravity. And for those still trapped within it, your freedom becomes unbearable or irresistible. So, if you've ever wondered why some people are drawn to you while others seem unsettled by you, this is why. You're not just a person, you're a mirror. You reflect back a question they haven't answered yet. And in a world where most people are desperate to be seen, the person who doesn't need to be seen, who instead sees, becomes unforgettable. You don't just attract, you awaken. You don't just charm, you challenge yourself. And in your silence, a different kind of power speaks.